let's go. So we're just going with e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, and instead of butcher the Sicilian with the bishop e5 that had its and got its popularity on the channel, and not only on channel, actually it sells on Chessable all the time, and I'm so happy with it. I just want to show you a line where I had like such a good results with the white pieces. It's Grand Prix attack. Here on the channel you can find lots of videos about the Grand Prix attack with the white pieces. It begins with f4 and 75% of the games go with g6. Then you play knight f3, bishop g7, and here on the channel you're going to be able to find bishop e5, the main and the, let's just call it like most convincing move for advantage with the white pieces. Although today I just want to show you like a sparkles of a new line. It's called left hook variation, and let me just explain the point of a3. First of all, it's a nice waiting move in terms of, I just want to see, do they want to play e6 followed by knight g on e7, or do they want to play systems with they call it typical dragonish style, and the more flexible d6 followed by knight f6. That's the first thing. Second thing, I just have to tell you that a3 helps us with the bishop c4, and we've just created the shelter for the bishop on a2 in case we need to go back and to keep our light square bishop, because usually in the main lines of the Grand Prix attack it can be taken by black. So we just have to pay attention on that one as well. Then another thing in this situation is that when they play and when they go with like a3, we also want to go with b4. b4 doesn't happen always. It happens against e6 lines. And finally, I just want to tell you one thing, because it got a great popularity, and many of you asked me to buy those PGNs about the Serbian system against English. I know you're probably wondering, like, what the hell is this guy doing? What kind of English opening he's now showing here? Well, somewhere on the channel, like I believe it was like 3 or maybe even 4 years ago, I published a very convincing, very killing, and very dangerous systems against English players, where after c4 you play e5, knight c3, knight c6, g3, and then bishop c5. If you remember, I called it Serbian system because one of the first guys who used it was Grandmaster Nikola Sedlak from Serbia. And then a bunch of Serbians played it, like Ivan Išević beat a couple of times, a great player. Damljanovic with it very easily with the black pieces. Then lots of Serbian guys used it, and then it got its popularity. Even Nakamura afterwards used it, and Magnus Carlsen. So after bishop c5, bishop g2, one of the most important things in those positions is a6. And when they play e3, d6, if they go knight g on e2, you go back with the bishop, and if they go castles, you just go with that h5 with the attack. Now, if we have to compare and to do the reverse thing on the left hook variation, so I'm just going to flip up the board and tell you that after knight c3, knight c6, f4, g6, left hook even has these ideas of h4 and h5 once they go with e6, knight g and e7. So just like you see, and of course we go with the bishop c4 and bishop a2, just like in English, against English opening, where in Serbian system we do the same with the bishop c5 and bishop a7. So if you really want to find some similarity between those two lines, feel free to find the video here on the channel, and you're gonna like it very much. So let's go with, after a3, there are basically only two approaches by black. They can go with e6, and they can go with d6. Those who go with d6, then you just play a normal Grand Prix type of the game, where bishop on c4 does pretty good job, because one of the most critical things in the Grand Prix attack is if you play instantly bishop c4, they will be going with e6, knight g on e7, and chase away that bishop and fight against it with knight g on e7 and d5. And let's be absolutely objective here. White doesn't have such a great chances of reaching the advantage. There are so many interesting, entertaining positions for white, but it's not, according to the engines and latest analysis, good for reaching any advantage out of the opening. And I wish on bishop c4 everyone goes d6. So basically, now, let's be honest, I don't necessarily need a3 in this position, but in many lines, I hate to lose my lights for a bishop, so I can see a3 and the left hook variation as a good addition to this Grand Prix opening and to this whole variation. So after like a3, I'm just talking about not e6 but d6 lines. Your bishop goes on c4, and just like I said, knight on a5 will never be any special attempt, because your bishop will go back on a2 and you're gonna keep it there. So now I'll show you a game between Carlsen and Darda. Darda played the most classic approach, knight f6, Magnus played d3, castles, castles, a6, Magnus put the bishop back, and after b5, he went with the queen e1, going for a very classic Grand Prix idea. For example, Magnus would like to go with the queen h4, f5, bishop h6, and knight g5. With the additional bishop on a2, this whole attack gets even much more than in classic Grand Prix attack, where you just give it up for the knight. Unlike those classic GPA positions, GPA is like a shortcut for the Grand Prix attack, where the light square bishop is given for the knight. Here, let's just say a good side for the black could be that the knight could go on d4. Or just what Darda did, played b4, and Magnus played and put the bishop back on b1. I know it looks a little bit funny, but keep in mind this is Magnus. So after e6, brought the knight back to e2, played d5, played c3, and now he's opening up the bishop. After like bishop e3, captured here, played rook f2 to unpin his knight, played knight d4, and launched the attack with h4. This was a blitz game, and unfortunately Magnus lost this game with black pieces. I don't want to show you now why did he lose, and keep in mind this was blitz, but I checked most of these moves. According to the engine, they look really good, and white was, of course, when it comes to Magnus, white knew what was he doing in the game, and he got a very nice position. What I like about this one, it has like a pretty stable control of the center, just like in French Steinitz positions. Then second thing, that bishop that went on b1, Magnus found a way to make it work with bishop b1, c3, d4, and then h4 and h5. Very lovely plan, and objectively speaking, white was in most of this game in a pretty good control of the position. When your bishop comes on c4, then since you already committed yourself with d6, now it's too late to go e6, knight g7, and d5. And because of that, we just go castles, knight g7, d3, and now when they play d5, now we're gonna check game between Magnus Carlsen and Vidit. I just have to say, unlike the line where they play instantly e6, knight g7, and d5, here they wasted tempo for d6, and now they put e6 and d5, which means that we're going to have like a relatively easy game. After bishop a2, typical idea, and just like I said, this is the only beneficiary thing that black can take advantage of. It's knight jumping into the center. Magnus played queen f2, and now broke the game with one of the most important like ideas in the whole Grand Prix attack left hook variation. It's f5. What a nice, strong, and definitely promising move. All your pieces are placed on the f file. They go after the f7. This bishop on like a2 is doing an amazing job. As far as I'm concerned, I would be very, very happy to be white in this game. And after f5, Magnus won this game relatively easy. After g takes, he takes, bishop g5, rook a to e1, and move the knight back. He's now threatening b4, c3 to shut off the bishop, repositioning the queen to g3 onto the king side, knight from the queen side to go onto the king side with knight e2, knight f4. So many nice things, and White is just doing good. This is Magnus Carlsen against FIDE. And finally, if Castle, Morozevich against Rainier Castellanos. Very nice game. So this guy didn't go for d5 immediately. Morozevich anyways put the bishop, and you really have to say that this looks like Serbian system against English with one difference. The difference is that if he immediately went for e6, knight g7 without castle, for example, if you first play d3 and they go knight g7 and then you bring the bishop back and they go castles, since the knight is on e7, you can easily go with h4, h5, and attack the black game, because the knight is not on f6 to control and cover h5. And second thing, on any h5 you just go g4, jump with the knight, and you just want to capture by queen and break onto the h file with h5. What a nice and lovely game. This really looks good. And in the game was knight g7. Morozevich's opponent, now GM Castellanos, played actually castle, bishop a2, b6, queen went on e1, knight d4, and here Morozevich didn't play like Magnus, queen f2, he took on d4, brought a knight back, and went after the pawn on d4. After e5, he kind of provoked his, weakening the diagonal and the f7 square, captured, took on f7, and finished him off soon after. So this is Morozevich against Castellanos, 18 moves, relatively nice and easy game by Morozevich, and he was always known as a player with very lovely style and nice attacking ideas out of the openings. So we've seen how to play against d6. Let's just make recap of the most important things. Against d6, your bishop always go on c4. Unlike the classic variation of the Grand Prix attack, your bishop on c4 is doing a great job. Second thing, you always can put it back on a2. If you want to play something similar to the Serbian system, play d3, bishop a2, and wait for them to play e6, knight g7, and short castle, in which case you can launch the attack with h4 and h5. Usually that's not a case, but when they play e6, you can just play castle, and I really have to say that here, plan of Magnus against FIDE, bringing the bishop back, playing queen e1, queen f2, and breaking with f5 should be one of the most important things. Also, don't be too materialistic here, because you're just sacking the pawn to open up your bishop, to open up the f-file, to weaken black on the light squares, specifically d5, e6, and f7. That's what I want to show you. And finally, after a3, there is a line with e6. Speaking of the line with e6, this is a line that the left hook representatives like to face so much. It's simply so, I would say, likable, because when they play e6, we have that idea with b4. I very much enjoy in this b4 ideas, breaking on c5, and here I have a lot to show you. First of all, what's happening if they play mistake with knight takes b4? It happened in a game between Grandmaster Shkuro and 2100 player, and this guy captured, and looks like he's about to get the knight on c3, in which case white would be really suspicious. Although Grandmaster Shkuro came up with knight b5, he's currently up a piece, but after bishop a1, he's currently down an exchange. Although he played c3, locking the bishop on a1, and after queen b6, queen a4, threatening that bishop, defending on e4, taking on e4. This guy just decided to take on e4. He was dead lost. He's threatening bishop a3 here. He's threatening knight d6 here. He's threatening to go back with the queen and to simply take this bishop. I would call it miserable bishop on a1. And in 11 moves, Shkuro was winning. He won this game soon after, but You will rarely find openings against Sicilian where you can win in 11 moves. Then another option could be what happens when they play c takes b4, a takes b4, and knight b4. You know, we just threw the glove into their face and we're just telling them, okay, let's go. And they're just, you know, like bringing the back favor to us and say, okay, I'm ready for the challenge. I'm going to take on b4 and let's see what's so special about this opening? Well, buddy, there are so many special things, and I'm about to teach you here. So you play bishop a3. Now, these systems are even some sort of reminiscent to the Volga system, Banco Gambit. So if they go back with the knight c6, a very lovely knight b5, you have an amazing bishop knight that can jump here. You don't care about an exchange. Who would care? Actually, I'm happier to give up my rook for the dark square bishop than anything else, because they're anyways facing the weakness of the dark squares. So they don't play knight c6 in these positions, but they usually play bishop f8 or queen b6. I'll show you a game between David Howell and some guy 2300 Kretov. This guy Kretov played queen b6. Howell played d5. A very common idea in Grand Prix attack games, because you always want to go with the knight on e4 and to jump eventually on d6. This is a nice thing. I like this position so much. Looks good for white, and definitely they can't defend all our threats all of a sudden on the dark squares. Anyways, when after knight d5 you play knight e4, knight g7, g3. You gotta defend that before you give check. Knight d6, king f8, c4, kicking the knight away, d4, bishop g2, and I'm just going a little bit faster with the rest of this game because this was pure demolition by David Howell, and I just have to say that he's one of the main, you know, like presenters, and I'm also willing to say one of the main gurus for this opening. Left hook, he absolutely won almost all his games online with this line so far. So it's a very lovely game. On queen b6, all you have to remember is that e5 idea, you know, like taking control of the dark squares and jumping or trying to jump with the knight on e4 and eventually on d6. A very nice game, and Howell won afterwards. Another game is Howell against Shevchenko. Shevchenko, sorry, not knight c6, knight b5. Shevchenko in this game against Howell played bishop f8. It kind of makes sense because the dark squares are not weak at the moment. And also by bishop f8 you're just defending the knight on b4. Howell played his favorite move e5, once again controlling and or attempting to take control of the dark squares. Very lovely thing here. And after d5, looks like he was having like a pretty good opening with the black pieces, but actually his game fell apart in just 5 moves. Howell now played queen b1. Now, this position reminds me on Win Gambit against French. When you sack that pawn with b4 and then you just go with these Volga ideas. I mean Banco Gambit ideas. So after knight c6, knight b5, all of a sudden you see the important moment of the game that he won't be able, I mean black won't be able to stop simply penetration on the dark squares, specifically d6. So after bishop a3, rook a3, knight check, knight g5, da-da-da-da, 14 moves against 2700, Howell won the game as well. And then you're just saying, okay, so they're not supposed to take it by knight or by pawn. Can they play like b6 to defend it? Well, that sounds like a good idea, and that sounds like a pretty nice flexible approach by black. Johan Hjartarson played against Howell in a blitz. Howell captured and played e5. Makes sense. He just wants to go afterwards with knight e4. They all go d6. So they're not supposed to go d5, because if they go with d5, you can go knight b5, knight d6, bishop b2. But if they go d6, somehow they're just going after that potential weakness on e5 that at the moment presents one of the crucial, I would say, hopes in our position. After bishop b5, knight g7, knight e4, Howell now wants to play bishop b2, d takes, f takes, castles, bishop c6. He gives up that bishop to take control of the dark squares. And I just have to tell you that this position really looks promising for white. Simply, they have lots of problems on the dark squares, and eventually he managed to win the game. I don't want to show you like the rest of this game because he made it, the guy, like quite soon, even on h6. Actually, let me show you. e5, d3, knight d4, castles. So I'm just, like showing you a little bit faster. Queen d2, king h7, rook a2, e8, attacking on e5. Jump, knight g5. He wanted like penetration onto the king side and the dark squares. Check, queen h6, and queen mate. He didn't take, but played here. And after that happened, he just decided to bring the knight back. So now he once again threatens to take. And when the guy played here, played rook to e3, going at some point for rook to h3. This guy played rook b6, played bishop d4, and played a very smart idea, moving his rook here. Okay, I just have to be honest and to tell you that I believe that he's just missed the mate. He played that rook to f3. Could he go with queen h6? Am I missing something? Isn't this mate? Da-da-da-da, Big Maya found the mate. Okay, so yeah, you just have mate, and that's how it works here. Finally, if they play d5 instead of d6, for which I believe is the best move for black there, d5 is nothing. We just have a nice control of the dark squares, and once again we have like some sort of like reminiscent of the like Queen Gambit against French, and you're about to see Carlsen against Gukesh. But before that, e5, of course, as always, we're happy to take control of the dark squares. Unfortunately, we cannot now jump on e4 and d6, but we're now actually threatening to, like do that by knight b5, knight d6. So when the guy captured, Gukesh played knight h6, but let me just show you a game of Bernatsky against another guy. Bernatsky, 2600 guy from Ukraine. His opponent played knight g7. Bernatsky played b5, played bishop a3, and went all in with h4, knight g5, g4, rook h3. Here he could have even taken on h5 and finished him off. He played king f1, knight e4, g takes, d3 because it was check, and his opponent in 20 moves resigned. So just like you see, after d5, e5, somehow these positions are so difficult for playing from black's point of view. After c takes, a takes, Gukesh played against Magnus knight h6. You won't see too many games where Gukesh playing black lost his games in just 18 moves, and he got destroyed by Magnus. So Magnus played b5, played d4, and position is already quite dubious for black. These knights are nowhere, especially the h6 knight. Okay, e7 is fine. The bishop is not active. This one is inactive as well. Of course, possibility to take control of the dark squares and to be to monstrously, like take control of the a3 fa diagonal. That's all good. So after castles, played bishop d3, bishop d7, castles a6, bishop a3, and just like you see, white was in full control. So after Gukesh captured, Magnus recaptured, played queen d2 to avoid knight e3, queen b6, played bishop c5, took on a8, and played g4. Gukesh was unable to defend both of these knights, and he resigned the game. If you take a look, generally speaking, at the whole game, d5, e5, 8 takes, and like knight h6, Magnus just played logical move b5, because that pawn, it's not about hanging. I'm always open to give it up, but actually it's about getting control of the dark squares and playing afterwards bishop a3. Then he completed his development with bishop d3 and castle, put a bishop on a3, and since Gukesh threatened knight e3, he just played queen d2 to avoid it, and afterwards bishop c5. So the whole game was somehow, it went pretty smooth for Magnus, and that's how he won that blitz game against Gukesh. And finally, you're about to see my game. You're about to see my game. I'm not so sure how good is that, because I was showing you like most of these strong guys and how did I play this system. I also played it in tournament game, keep that in mind. So when I played a3, my opponent was 2200 guy from Serbia, Mitrovic Marian, and he went for e6. I said, okay, not a big deal, let me just go with that gambiting stuff with b4. And that's why we call it left hook. And in my opinion, he played one of the most solid ideas, d6. So I just captured and in a pretty much classic sense pushed e5 in order to be able to take control of d6 and specifically e4 with the knight. So when I played e5, my opponent went knight g7, I played knight e4, attacking pawn, threatening knight e6 and threatening knight f6. He played castle. Here, I remember the game. I didn't even think for a single sack. Should I take that pawn on c5? That's a miserable pawn. I'm not interested in pawn. I'm interested in checkmate. So I just said, okay, let's go with bishop b2. I want to jump and support knight f6. He played b6. And here, I was supposed to be a brave guy who was supposed to play actually h4, the knight g5, knight f to g5, so I can go with bishop e2, castle and bishop h5, or I can immediately just go with some g4 ideas and do the attack. I didn't do that. I played bishop d3 because I was playing very safely. I wanted to develop both of my bishops, avoid his main idea with the knight before, and afterwards to go with h4, h5 and with the attack. My opponent played knight f5. I said, let me just play solid chess. I played castle, and the guy realized that at some point I want to go with g4. Eventually queen e1, queen h4, maybe just jump on f6 and play here, and he played h5. I said, okay, he wants to stop my ideas with g4, not a big deal. I played knight f to g5. Now I realized that I wanted to break his position with g4. He played knight cd4, I played g4. Now my bishop on d3 does a great job defending on c2 as well. I played queen h3, threatening checkmate, and when the guy played rook e8, I just placed my last piece that was inactive into activity. He played a6, I kicked the knight away, played knight f6, and he was dead lost. I'm attacking his rook. I don't have to take it if I don't want. I can take on f5 and play whatever I like, but he just captured my bishop. I played queen h7 and mated this guy like this. Guys, hopefully you enjoyed the video. You know that I always find some interesting ideas for you, and for many of you who have problems with the Sicilian Grand Prix attack, but not in its classic sense, but something new, something trendy, something surprising, and most important for me, something attacking and aggressive. Have a good one and see you next time. Bye bye.